All right, starting in verse 6. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause this people to inherit the land that I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may have good success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Let's read this together. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. You may be seated.
We're in the second week of our series, which is called Fear Not. Last week, we put up kind of a pattern of fear. We started with that. We started with, where does fear originate in us? We talked about fear being this idea of we have certain beliefs and things that we know. Things that we know, things that we hold true. Similar to, I know that my team will not win in the playoffs every year. I have this belief. I grew up in San Diego, so I cheer for the Chargers. They're no longer in San Diego, so I moved before they did, so I'm not mad at them. But I have this belief that they will not win in the playoffs. So therefore, the way that I respond to them losing in the playoffs every year, this year, having a 30-point lead at halftime and still losing, I'm not surprised. There was no outrage. My Monday was not affected by that, other than a few calls from family members and some of you to see if I was okay. What I believe going into a situation completely impacts how I respond to it. And that's where our fears come from. Go ahead and put on the screen that order. It starts, you'll see, with our beliefs. Then it moves on to our triggers. A certain thing, because of what I believe, certain things have power based upon what I believe. We talked about last week a very simple, fictional character, right? If you believe in Captain Hook, that's okay, right? Like we're glad you're here, inclusive place, right? But Captain James Hook, Captain of the Jolly Roger, is a very formidable sword fighter, captain. He's an adult fighting against kids. Again, that's a really awkward part of the story we don't bring up. But he has triggers, and that is that every time he hears the tick-tock of a clock, he gets irrational. But it's based upon a belief he has that if that croc who has the tick-tock finds him, it will eat his other hand or the rest of him, right? And so he behaves irrationally, and he even has shame about it. It leads to that. His reaction is usually to run away, where he has like an army of pirates with guns. You think they could take out one croc or build some sort of wall or something like that. But what ends up happening is Captain Hook has no real friends or relationships other than Shmi, who kind of does that role for him. But that's a very fictional way of looking at it. But we looked at how this is actually what we live in. That our beliefs, based upon our experiences, based on what we've been told, based upon the media we take in, we develop beliefs. Those beliefs create triggers in our lives. And triggers can actually be a good thing too. That if we grew up in such a way that when we saw rain, the first thing we thought of was, oh, free car wash. Way different than if we look and go, oh, my soccer game's canceled. Or if you're a parent, you're going, oh, the soccer game's canceled, right? There's different ways that our beliefs, our experiences, our passions, and our opinions impact the way we respond. And so often what happens is we don't see this pattern happening. We don't recognize it. What we recognize is the way other things are affecting us. We recognize the way that we might feel shame about how this affects me different than other people. And what ends up happening is that many of us, especially in the western part of the world, the Western Hemisphere, we have gotten really good, like professionally good, at living part of our lives in the darkness. What do I mean about that? If our lives were like a house, I don't know if you guys grew up in like a house where like your mom had the good room. You know what I'm talking about? Like, so a lot of old houses, especially around where we live in Arvada, there's like a room that used to be the good room. We called it the living room, and then there was the family room that just had all our junk in it, and like my brothers and I would rollerblade in like the house in there. But the good room was where when people looked in the window, when people came over, that room looked really good, right? The couch was all nice, there were like pillows on there. We didn't always hang out in there. We hung out in the family room, not the good room. I think what we do in life is a lot of times we have a good room. There's a part of me I want people to see, and I get so used to living there, and I shape my identity around that no one really gets to know all of me because I don't want them to see that. Fear tells me, if you really knew me, what I am capable of, you'd never want to get to know me. But living in darkness will never lead to relationships. That would be like if this room was pitch black and you and I had an hour to talk and you heard the sermon or we talked about everything and we both were really friendly. We were talking, but we never got to see each other. I never got to see what you look like. I never got to see the way that you respond to things I say. I never got to see how tall you are. I never got to see how close you were to me or whatnot. If the lights are completely out, I can't really get to know you. Similar to when we live life with part of us in darkness. But if the lights were flipped off all of a sudden, we talked about this last week, when we bring our fears into the light, it's uncomfortable. Similar to if you've been sleeping and someone goes in. My daughter actually calls the like fluorescent light in her room. She loves the lamps and incandescent lights, right? But she calls that the illegal light because it just hurts her eyes. Like when she's like used to the incandescent light or it's morning or whatever. I'm getting some head nods. You know what I'm talking about. But this whole series is asking us to identify our comfort zone, that border that we've created, and maybe not to be pushed out of it. This isn't like teaching an eagle to fly where you just drop them out of the sky, but maybe to identify it and kind of poke around of why it's there. So we've got that right there. But here's the thing. As someone who struggles with pride, as someone who struggles with maybe overconfidence at times, it's very natural for me in unguarded moments that I believe that I can do everything myself. That, you know what, I can just live in the darkness. People can know just the good part of me. And that if everyone else would just stay out of my way, I could do everything I need to do. We've got some old people here, so you guys have seen 24. 24 was a TV show where it was 24 episodes in a season, and each episode was what? 1 hour of that 24-hour period, okay? And there was a main character, played by Kiefer Sutherland, where he was the hero. Like, he was the cool guy. Even though he had like a man purse, like, he still was really cool. And the whole series, every season, it was like, if they would have just listened to Jack in the first hour, the other 23 hours would have been way different. He always knows what to do, but nobody listens to him. I made fun of sitcoms, now I'm making fun of action adventure shows. But there's this reality that going through life, I don't have to confront my fears. If everyone would just listen to what I say, everything would be great. But here's the problem. We need other people in our life. And oftentimes, when I'm upset that people are not seeing things my way, it's typically because they're stepping into my comfort zone and asking me to get out, which is uncomfortable. Simon Sinek talks about this, that we desire to have great leaders around us, but very few people really want to be great leaders. Have you ever thought about that? I can get frustrated with other leaders in my life, but do I really want to do what I'm asking them to do? And here's what he says. Leaders are the ones willing to give up something of their own for us. Their time, their energy, their money, maybe even food off their own plate. When it matters, leaders choose to eat last. And he gives, like in this book, Leaders Eat Last. Like it's really catchy sounding. And it's actually a great book full of like basically his great quotes and then a lot of stories in between, that kind of thing. You could listen to, I never recommend books, but if you want to just listen to him talk about it on YouTube, it'll save you a lot of time, right? But he gives this whole like military story, this true story of like a military leader who led his people, the people under him really well. And it was using like that idea that he said, I will eat last. That if there's no food left, then I will eat last. So it's a beautiful story. There were times that the people that he was leading would actually give him some of their food because they knew he wouldn't be able to eat. Like, it was a beautiful story. And I love that he talked about this, but when I read it, I go, yeah, this is countercultural. Yeah, this will change the world. Like, if our leaders were like this, could you imagine the last time you were frustrated with a leader, a boss, a teacher, a coach? If they would just be more like this, I would want to follow them. And I go, that's not where that started. That's not new. Jesus did that really well. That if you look at the depiction, Jesus did this 2 times incredibly well in the same evening, on the very last day before he was crucified. Jesus was gathered with his disciples 2,000 years ago. They were in the middle of like this very like traditional meal. It was called a Seder meal for Passover. And like it was like a pretty formal meal. And this is at a time 2,000 years ago when they didn't have air conditioning. They didn't like wear shoes with socks. They wore sandals at best. There were not these like professional roads made that were like, you know, with sidewalks and stuff. Animals were used for transportation. So pretty much like their feet were disgusting when they would come inside. And if you didn't have like great ventilation put in, they didn't have HVAC at that time, right? It could really smell in these rooms. If you've ever gone into like a barn, or you've ever gone into just like an abandoned like shelter out in the middle of like the woods or a field, you're just like, oh, it smells in here. Well, they had a tradition that the lowest of the people that are in your group, the lowest servant in the house or the child, was in charge of grabbing a basin of water, which you had to go get the water from the well or from your family's like supply that someone brought. And then you had to get like your own like towel or your own like outer garment, like your vest. If you're in Colorado, it would be your vest, right? You take that off. And you're supposed to wash people's feet. In the middle of the meal, Jesus took a towel and a basin. He went around and he washed his disciples' feet. And they did not like that. Like, it offended them. And if we were part of that kind of culture in that time, we would be offended too. And let's be real, I'm not washing your feet this morning. But what if I did? You wouldn't be like, Jared, you're too good for this. You're the leader here. But you would also feel like, I don't want to expose myself to being served by you. I don't need you to do this for me. I can wash my own feet. Jesus said to them, this is what leadership looks like. Leadership is saying, I am not here to use my power, my authority, to be able to get something from you, but to give something to you. Leadership in many circles, maybe you've had jobs like this, I know I have, where leadership was, how can I get people to do what I need to meet my goals, versus what Jesus is doing here, how can I help them accomplish the goals they were created for? How can I lean into what they need? Jesus washed their feet, and hours later, they were in a garden. He was arrested. He went through a shoddy trial. He was beaten. He was mocked. He was separated from those he loves, unable to speak with them. He was betrayed by his closest followers. They all ran away. The men, the women, every disciple ran away. And then he was killed with criminals. Now, the end of that story right there ends really great on Easter Sunday. But in reality, what Jesus did is he chose to walk the path to the cross for other people. That we can sit here today and we can talk about this idea that if you are trapped in darkness, if you are living in darkness, you are living in fear, if anxiety, if depression, if these things are all around you, that Jesus says, I've actually provided a way for rescue, and it's through my sacrifice for you. Now, the idea that we take from this, there's this term that Jesus never used this, but we use this as leaders. It's called servant leadership. Can you guys say that? Servant leadership? Yeah, mumble it is fine. I didn't really lead you well there, right? That was poor leadership on my part. But, right, that's kind of what happens when we don't lead well. But servant leadership can sound like an oxymoron. It can sound like something that doesn't really make sense, because if I'm leading, I can't also be serving. But Jesus turns around that idea. If the idea of leadership in your mind is somebody in the back with a whip getting other people to move forward, we have to change that when we follow Jesus. That leading means I'm in the front pulling with everybody else. That if we don't get there, no one gets there. If you're tired, I'm tired. I want a leader like that. Jesus did that incredibly well. And he shocked a few people with the way he leads. If you've ever yelled at the TV screen in the past decade at politicians, if you've ever been frustrated coming home from work day after day after day because of a boss and their insecurities, if you have been frustrated with a teacher who doesn't teach well or doesn't help you or favors other students, you have longed for a servant leader in your life. And today, my challenge is for you to long to be a servant leader. For you to be someone who says, I'm not just going to lead others well, like tell them what to do, I'm going to serve them well. A few observations from the text today, and we looked at Jesus, but we're going to look at Joshua a little bit here. And that was what Kurt read a minute ago. That was actually God's words to Joshua. And here's kind of the thing. Joshua is leading 900,000 people. Now, those of you like the Garners with 5 kids, right? Just five? With 5 kids, like that's multiplied a few times, right? You think about leading that many people, like there's everything from what are they going to eat to like sometimes they get bored and things happen and they fight and that happens. I'm talking about the Israelites now, guys. I'm not talking about parenting anymore, right? But there's all kinds of things that happen. But here's the thing, that estimated 900,000 people had been in slavery in Egypt for decades, for generations. They'd been in slavery. They'd known nothing but slavery. Their parents knew slavery, their grandparents knew slavery, and even farther back. All they had were these like kind of stories that were passed on orally of a time when they were God's chosen people. But they're living in slavery. And I think that that's something that we can relate to today, because when we live in fear, we live in a form of slavery. And I'm not trying to cheapen that term by comparing it to this, because there's different levels of ways that fear can control us. But as we talked about last week, fear is a prison we can live in that affects the things that we say. It affects the things we do. It affects what we wear. It affects where we go. It affects our interactions with people we love. Fear can lead us to, instead of being honest with someone that we love, to actually lie and create a divide between us and them, and justifying it through the voice of fear. Joshua is just become in charge of 900,000 people who have been wandering in the desert for 40 years. See, they've been in slavery so long. When you are in bondage for so long to fear, when you're in bondage for so long, you might not even know what freedom tastes like. In fact, you kind of miss the comforts of what's known, even though it was hurting you. So they've been going for 40 years. Moses led them. You guys might know Moses, his burning bush thing, that kind of thing. There's a lot of stories there that are really cool. But Moses will have his day at Restoration Church. Today is Joshua's day. Joshua was taken over. Joshua was not like a teenager. He had been mentored by Moses, and now it's time. The people had been in Egypt, a land that wasn't their own, and now they're sitting on the border of a land that God is saying, this is going to be a land for you. You will actually be a people. You won't just be a traveling group of people. You will be a people, a nation. They don't even know what that feels like. Joshua doesn't know how to describe that to them. They're following God to have that, and they know that there's that longing in their heart for that. It would be pretty obvious that Joshua would be afraid in some ways. So there's a couple observations from this word that God gave Moses. And there are times when I think God will tell us this through a friend, There will be times that God speaks this almost exact message through his voice to us or through a friend and, of course, through his word. First observation is this. In verses 6, 7, and 9, he says pretty much the same thing. The same exact thing. What was it? Be strong and courageous. Now, the simplicity of this message is brilliant, and here's why. Because when I have a problem today, I can get a billion different opinions about what to do. If I have something I'm stressed about, something I'm anxious about, something I procrastinated about, I don't have to think for myself. I literally, can you guys time me? Who's got a stopwatch? Ready? I can literally do this. And I can type in a question, I can type in a keyword, and the search engine will go, is this what you're thinking? Right? Like I can even have it tell me my question and not just the answers anymore. I can go on the internet, eternity is what I call the internet. I can go there. I can go to any one of you. I can send a group text out, and I can ask for opinions. I can ask for, you can send me some articles, right? I mean, anything. You can tell me your stories, and I can just be overloaded with information, which is completely unhelpful, right? Can I get an amen on that? Completely unhelpful. Now, there might be people that are trying to help, and I did ask you for help, theoretically. But God keeps it really simple here. It's in sermon writing, my professor in undergrad, so that was 1 billion years ago, said, this is like a flower sermon, where you've got the main middle of the flower, and you just keep coming back to it, and you talk about something else, and you come back to be strong and courageous. Then you talk about this, then you come back to it, be strong and courageous. If our kids would sit through that kind of a lecture, we would do it. But it's that repetition. I know I'm talking about this, and this happened, and this happened. Be strong and courageous. I know this is what you're thinking, and here's what you need to do. Be strong and courageous. God feels the need to repeat it 3 times. And maybe he said it more, and this is just what we got from it. But the simplicity of that message is a gift. And oftentimes what happens when I hear a simple response from the Lord, or when I hear a simple response that I know is true, I don't go, thank you, Lord, I will obey now. I go, let's look for some more stuff. Let's look for some more options. Let's look for something that costs less of my time, that costs less of my money, that maybe is something that I already can kind of fit into my schedule. That when God calls us to do something, oftentimes it might be super simple, but it might be that we still have that longing. Sometimes it's the voice of fear that says, let's look for another option. Look for something that maybe we can do God's idea. God, we'll do yours. And this too. Be strong and courageous is 2 things. I don't know about you, but I know a lot of strong people. A lot of really strong mothers. Really strong friends. Mentally, physically strong, one or both. But being strong doesn't make us automatically courageous. It might make us confident. But to have courage, to be able to confront our fears, to bring our fears out into the darkness, takes courage, not just strength. I think we live in kind of a superhero like culture now, where we think just because someone is strong, whether they have an iron suit or alien powers in a movie, or maybe they just have some experience, or maybe they're a teacher with a degree, or a pastor, or they've 1 billion years of experience doing the job that they're doing, we assume at times that if they're strong, they'll also be courageous. That oftentimes if someone says, you're very strong, there's this kind of thought that you would just charge into the problem. But I think the problem we have in our political world, we have the problem in our church world, and in the problem in our homes, is that a lot of really strong people are bound by fear. And so whether today you are being encouraged by the Lord to be strong, or whether he's encouraging you to be courageous, he calls us to both. And the reality is that we all struggle with fear, even the strong. And today you might be someone who thinks you're weak, whether it's physically or mentally, or you just feel really behind, or you compare yourself to other people. Today I want to tell you that feeling weak doesn't mean we're weak. In fact, I love this verse in 2 Corinthians where Paul is writing, and Paul, we believe from this, like scholars believe that he had some sort of a physical or mental difficulty, like maybe disability, might be too strong of a word for what we know. But he wrote this. He said, "The Lord said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power, God's power, is made perfect in weakness." So Paul says, "Therefore I, Paul, will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why for Christ's sake I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecution, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." Observation number 2. God reminds Joshua to center himself on a source of truth. I don't know if you guys have ever noticed this, but like earlier when we were praying, we were standing. And when you're standing and you close your eyes, your brain starts to send signals to your body of like, "Uh-oh, I don't know if like something's coming at me." Some of us might be gymnasts and we might have like great balance, or maybe you practice that. But for most people, closing our eyes, we lose a lot of our senses for balance. So what do we need to do? I just center myself. I could do this all day now. But this right here, you're going to see me struggle. We have to center ourselves. We have to center ourselves on something solid and something real and something good. And believe me, as people, we do that really well. It's not a matter of whether we worship. It's not a matter of whether we find something to hold on to. It's what we choose to do that with. I'm going to read where it talks about that in verse 8. "The book of law shall not depart from your mouth, Joshua, but you shall meditate on it." Now, meditate, I know that we get a lot of Eastern type stuff there, but meditate simply means like there's a devotion there. If I'm going to meditate on something, it means it's not just like a 5 minutes every day. I'm constantly, kind of like that song that gets stuck in your head, and you wake up in the middle of the night, you're like, why is this song in my head? Well, it's because you listen to it on repeat all day. It's because you looked up online to see the lyrics. It's because maybe you went to a concert. You began to, in many ways, meditate on that song. You meditated on that album, if anybody listens to albums anymore. Meditate on it day and night. And here, just like that song stuck in our head, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. See, the term book of law here, we would love to say that just like means the Bible. But can I just be real with you guys? Maybe you figured this out. You're pretty smart people. They didn't have a printing press. Like Gutenberg hadn't done that yet. So it's not like all of the Israelites and Joshua were like, "Oh yeah, the book of law. I got it right here. My name is on the front. Ooh, yeah, my translation, my favorite one." What they had it was kind of like the 10 Commandments, like those tablets that Moses brought down. Like Moses' story, look it up, right? Sweet story there. But all throughout them wandering in the desert, getting to this land that God said would be their own, they had a lot of questions about how to be people. They were following Egyptian laws, Egyptian customs, trying to keep their own customs, and they kept on going, "Moses, how do we be God's people? What is the way?" Kind of like when the disciples asked Jesus, "Jesus, we want to follow you, but we don't know the way." That has been the question forever, people, to God. And so as they ask him, we've got whole sections of scripture that are like the book of law that God gave to them. And some of it looks like he gave them like through like scenario situations. Some of them look like they were like proactive, like, "Hey, you guys going to mess this up? I'm just going to tell you this before it happens." And there's things that are very cultural in there when it comes to the book of law. But basically what the book of law was at that time was not their Bible they carried around. It was the word of God. It was the instructions that God had given them. And they would never have been at a place where they were like, "I don't want another law, God. I thought you were like here to free us." But that actually they saw the law as something that saved them. We talked about before. I would love to drive faster than the speed limit, but I know the reason for that is to protect me. I would love to be able to take a shortcut across a field to get to a great parking spot. But I know the reason that we have these roads and we have these laws about speed limits is to protect us. And that order is not bondage. Order is actually prosperity. That for us to have order in our society, to have a rule, to know, means one, we will get along better, but also we can live in harmony. We can be ourselves. That when God was saying, meditate on my law, he was saying the words that you've been given. So even though Joshua was not holding this Bible, that's what it is for us today. This is a gift from the Lord. That in many ways, I think that a lot of us might have been persecuted by it. Maybe we've seen leaders use words, the word of God, to actually create bondage, create prison, and maybe that's a trigger for you today. But I believe that if we can read this book, that if we can meditate on it, the way that we listen to our favorite song on repeat, that we would just say, God, how do I read this book and meditate on it so that I can find that way? That we're going to live according to what he wants. The rest of verse 8 says, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. I think I can relate to this, and I think you can too. How come an hour of streaming video or online gaming seems so short? But an hour in God's word or an hour in prayer seems impossible, right? How come I can justify more often, how I would like to calculate, like, forsaking sleep to do certain things, like watching a show or hanging out with friends or just staying up. But if I start to pray or I start to read the Bible, oh, it's my bedtime. I am so tired. I'll just do this another time. I've been so tired. No one ever says, I'm so tired I can't watch my favorite show, but we say, I'm so tired I just haven't been able to read the Bible. And how come I can pay for more streaming services but drag my feet investing in resources to help me meditate and know God's word? Now, I said I in all those statements because every one of them have been true for me. If you relate, I think that it's just because we're in the same culture. To escape this prison of fear requires us to latch ourselves on to something that is greater and more powerful than us, and God has given us his word. And even instructed Joshua, and I believe he's instructing us today. And this is my final observation from Joshua. And it's at the very end. Joshua 1:9, we find out that Joshua, you are not alone. God is with Joshua. And I think because we've read this whole thing, right? Like many of you, you're like, I know the story of Moses. I know the stories of Jesus, or I'm familiar with them, David and Goliath. The idea of God being with us is really not this mind-blowing thing. But this was mind-blowing to people who wonder about where God is. And I think that we can, just like when we hear someone say or sing, Jesus loves me, we can just be like, yes, put that in the fact bucket, but never apply it to our lives. I was challenged years ago. I don't even think I was finished with undergrad. Someone said to me, if someone lived your exact life, but they fully believed that God was with them, what would they do different than you? If every moment they fully believed that God was with them, whether it's on the side of the road, broke down, or your greatest moment sharing a great meal with people you love, if you fully believed God was with you, how would you live? And that's challenged me since then. And I wonder if that challenged Joshua in verse 9, how God ends it. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And I love that Kurt had us read that part together, because I think that this is the key. That he keeps going back to be strong and courageous, being strong and courageous. But if I just left you with that today and said, be strong and courageous, we would get up and say, how? Because I can't do it on my own. Because I'm going to go back to this full calendar that I don't even get to fill anymore or take things away from anymore. I'm going to go back to this and this and this and these plates that I'm carrying, and you want me to step out and lead others? I believe this is the key. I believe this is the key. And so I just want to end with this challenge. Leadership, in my mind, there's 3 levels of it. They are, you can lead yourself, you can lead others, and you can lead leaders. And oftentimes we praise people who can lead leaders. We say, wow, you, like the president or the head coach or the principal or people that are leading other leaders. This is why parenting teenagers is different, because all of a sudden they have opinions of their own. I can lead kids, right? It's like leading others. What do we eat, right? And then they become human, a little more human, and you have to lead leaders that have opinions that might be right sometimes, right? Like we can leave that gray. They might be right sometimes. There's these moments where they saw something or they, right? Like that moment when your kids start saying stuff you've said to them before back at you, right? Like they start singing the song from the TV show. We got a friend who said that like she was kind of losing it. She was like, face was turning red, hadn't said anything regret, no parent shame yet. But her like 4-year-old came up and said, remember the song, Mom? When we're mad, count to 5 or something like that. And she was like, I'm going in the other room. I'm going in the other room. Somebody pray for me. Somebody pray for my kid. I hope she finds food, right? But that's what leading leaders is so difficult. And so when political season gets here, I always go, I don't know why they want that job. I don't know why you think this would be a great job. Because it can't be because it's fun. Leading leaders is tough. But then there's leading others, people that you have to get on the same page to do something, whether you're coaching a baseball team, whether you're leading a class or leading in a home. Leading others is tough. And we can talk about those. Joshua was doing all of these. But here's where I believe that every one of us needs to start. That's with leading ourselves. Because every leader that I've ever been hurt by were living in darkness. They were insecure. They were scared. And I couldn't really see that at the time, but they were struggling to lead themselves well. And whenever we don't lead ourselves well, parents, teachers, coaches, friends, whenever we don't lead ourselves well, we can't lead others well. Because as the leaders go, so do the circles, the groups, and the families and the homes that we're a part of. Now, when you leave here, you're going to be in charge of your life. And you're probably leading other people too. You might be in charge of what's for lunch today. You might be in charge, and people have a lot of questions for you. And what's going to happen is there's this temptation to focus all our energy on what I can do for others and not figure out what can I do to lead myself well. See, so often we are creating cultures where we lead that put getting things done more than the health of ourselves. What we say here at Restoration Church is we need to value healthy people over healthy attendance, right? That if we don't get set up on time because we stop to pray for someone who needs to pray, that's going to be our church, right? If we need to go over because we need to just have some conversations, or we need to be able to say, hey, we're not doing music this week because the band just needs a break. Now, I know it sounds selfish because the band is me and one other person right now, or today. But what if that didn't take away from the beauty of a community, but actually added to it? That so often you hear, they used to, when they made those little signs in bathrooms that were knit, like the crocheted, they would say the greatest way to love your kids is to love your wife or love your spouse. You know, that's investing in something that might not directly impact someone else, but it does. So today I want to leave you with just this idea, because God convicted me years ago about this. I was opening up this thing called the newspaper. Ask your grandparents what that is, all right? And I was living in North Carolina at the time, and there's this university called Wake Forest. And it was like an op-ed by somebody at Wake Forest. And the headline said, if everyone at Wake Forest was just like me, what kind of school would it be? If everyone at Wake Forest University was just like me, what kind of university would it be? And the Lord spoke to me in that moment and called me out on some areas in my life that were just very dark. Some areas that I hid. I was a youth pastor at the time. I was in charge of a lot of people. Things were growing. Things looked really good. Our family was growing. At the time, there was a lot happening. My wife and I were both working, so we were dinks, right? Double income, no kids. We were living. But so much of my life was being lived in the darkness, and I was letting people into the good room. I was letting people see the part of me that my gifts and my talents, my skills, my kind of like could overshadow the idea. There's no other house. These are not the droids you're looking for, right? Like let's just stay here. And my relationships were shallow at best. People thought they knew the leader. They saw this leader that they thought was strong and courageous, but actually felt weaker than ever and more scared than ever. And you know what? I didn't even realize it, because I didn't have anybody in my life that could tell me what was happening there. Like I was fooling everybody. I was really good. And that's the worst. The really disciplined people are also really great at hiding. And the really disciplined people are also really good at not allowing other people in to help. But the Lord convicted me. I was scared to death. I had some great conversations with my wife. And what we realized is I needed to get a mentor. That was the first thing I did. And I didn't know how to do that. It takes a lot of work because there's a lot of tension between generations everywhere. Because older generations need honor, and they deserve honor. But also, younger generations need some respect. They also have things to say. So for the two to get along, it required me to humble myself a lot, but I got a mentor. And everywhere that I've lived now, I try and have a mentor, somebody who's like my dad's age, because he lives farther away, that can call me out and call me back to being who I need to be, who can ask me questions. Now I can be like, hey, here's the good room. Here's how I'm doing. And he's like, yeah, but what's back there? Can you let me see that? Can you tell me about that? Next thing I did, and this was the hardest one, I asked people to pray for me. Because asking people to pray for you, they assume you just got a diagnosis. They assume that there is something that is just, they're asking for prayer. There must be an affair. There must be something, their car got stolen, their house burned down. Can we just become a people that prayer is something we can ask for and we're excited to pray for them? That prayer actually is almost like a free gift financially. It takes very little time, but it takes a lot of pride to ask. I started asking people to pray for me. Different people I shared different amounts of information with, so it was different based on the relationship. Third, I drastically removed things from my life that I was giving too much time to. Things that were like, whether they were sinful, like just outright sinful, or things that led to just the kind of the person that I didn't want to be. That was actually easier than the asking for prayer or mentor, because I'm a very disciplined person. I was like, hey, if I want to do this, just like Fitness World, hey, I want to build muscle, so I will not eat this cake right now, I will do something different to get the results I want. Like, it was very easy there. And the fourth is I leaned into the reality that God is with me always. And that's where I want to end. I want to give you guys time to reflect here, because I saw a lot of head nods. I saw a lot of things happening here where what happens when someone says something that triggers us or something we relate to is all of a sudden we have to take the beliefs we have about ourselves and we have to hold them up to God's truth and ask ourselves, is one of these a lie? Is one of these worth giving my life for? Is one of these worth being uncomfortable for? Because I guarantee that the places in our lives we're living in darkness, in fear, in shame, and isolation are not comfortable. But they're hidden. And so to bring our fears out into the light, into God's light, is a step. But first we have to let God's truth be next to the truth that we're living by. the lies that have been spoken into our lives. And what I've been praying for all week for you and for those that are watching online is that you would be able to identify the voices in your head that have been speaking lies to you. Because you know what happens when we hear a lie over and over and over again? We just start to believe it. You are statements. And we often blame ourselves. We go, well, I'm thinking that. Well, there's an element of truth. Well, every lie has an element of truth to it, or else we wouldn't believe it. If I said to you today, you are going to wake up tomorrow, if you eat that, tomorrow you'll wake up and have a third arm, you would not go to bed scared about that. But if I said something, it just might have some truth to it. If I said something about a car ride you're about to take, or if I said something about a family member, it's going to stick a little, even if it's an outright lie. So what I'm going to put on the screen is this question: what is the area most needed in your life in order for you to be a servant leader, to lead yourself well? And I kind of put some options there for you. We don't usually do this, but I just want you to reflect on that. So what area is most needed in your life to be a servant leader? At your school, at work, at home, or even just on the car ride home right now? When you use the computer, when you're on your phone, when you're tired, when you're scared, when you're busy? Do you need more time meditating on God's Word? And just pick one, right? Don't be overwhelmed. Maybe there's a voice speaking to you like, you need all these. Well, let's just narrow in one. God, what is the one that needs to rise to the surface now? Where do I need to put more of my chips right now? Where do I need to put more of my energy? A healthy mentor to walk with you. We have mentors here at Restoration Church that would love to walk with you, at least for a little bit. Is it knowing and believing that God is with you? Because you can know it, but to truly believe it changes the way we live. Because our beliefs inform our triggers. And of course, asking for prayer, the hardest one for me, and still, if I'm honest, the hardest one. So I want to leave you guys with that. This is something that people have struggled with since the beginning of time, since the beginning of creation. And so what I would love to see is that wherever you go, that you would bring light, that people would recognize lies in their life because of the truth that you're living. And that just maybe what you're leaning on, that if you have a friend or a family member or a spouse that is stumbling around through life, that just maybe they would start leaning there too. So if you want to close your eyes, you can. But we're going to give you a minute to reflect here. Just ask God questions. Ask God uncomfortable questions if you need to. Let Him know your doubts. Let Him know your worries.